best team in the world. Whereas it always seems like they're just the best team at a specific tournament. Like whenever they win a tournament, they always have a ton of rounds where they take a huge risk or they do something really weird and it just happens to work out on that game and they win the tournament and they look amazing. But then it's like one of those scenarios where they only have to lose like one of those small battles out of the million that they have to win where the whole game's fucked up and then they will lose. So I actually still feel like SK, just in terms of consistency, is probably the best. And then the fact that there's no MTW, I think, really hurts things because they kind of like even things out in terms of the matchups, depending on who they play out of the other top teams. And then Na'Vi is just like, they're just all over the place at the moment. Like, I have no idea if they're, like, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if they lost to FX at this tournament.
I wish I knew how much Na'Vi played before events, because I feel like I would rank them really high if I knew they were playing like 120 hours, all 5 of them, putting in work. I would rank them, they're going to be, in the finals if they do that. But I don't think they're the type of team that can just pull an SK, go on a vacation, not put in any work, show up at an event, and win it. Like, they need to put in the work to win. They're not the type of team that can just show up. And I don't really know where to place them, so I'd place my ranking as SK, then FX, then Na'Vi.
Yeah, that's how I'd rank it as well. That's why it's sad that MTW isn't here, because even though I would actually probably put MTW 4th out of that group, MTW is sort of the wild card. Like, if you put them versus any of the others, I think it still makes, except Na'Vi, you put them versus any of the other two, and they could win those series, it'll be like very close.
I feel like MTW is always the type of team that they're going to beat M5 almost every time. They're going to beat FX.
They don't lose to bad teams.
Yeah, they beat like teams that don't play smart. They take advantage of. I feel like they know where to put their players. They know what strats to run to abuse their idiotic movements and mistakes that they're bound to make. And I mean, FX and Moscow 5 usually give them pretty tough matches, like close, but they usually end up winning all of them. Like even when FX wins, it's in like double OT on a third map, Like they don't usually let those teams just walk all over them. Whereas SK and Na'Vi obviously have a much greater chance of just beating them straight up.
Okay, so outside of those teams, the biggest problem for this event is that there's no mouse sports, and since there's only one team from each country, there's no Fnatic, no Lions, no ESC, etc.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's pretty, to me, it's like totally apparent that like the team after the top 3 is Moscow 5, and then I'd say like Isahara and WinFact are like marginally just behind them. So it's like that pack of 3 teams is behind them. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of teams that are fighting for that like 5th to 8th spot right now in Europe. There's not. I don't know how you feel, but I don't feel like any team has solidified themselves as like, that 5th to, that...
I would have said that Mouse would have been if Mouse had won the final of the IEM China convincingly, but the fact that they lost to Fnatic in sort of like a fairly back and forth close game makes me think that... I think there's like maybe 5 teams... Well, if everyone had land money, I'd say there's probably like 5 or 6 teams who are like just fighting behind the elite teams. Because you could even throw people like DTS in there, but they probably won't go to many events, so like they won't actually be that relevant. But all of those teams can beat each other for the most part. Like I think the only team that are going to struggle is that, like I think WinFact is going to have problems in the sense that I think they're not very well matched up against Fnatic and Mouse, and they're 2 teams that they might have to play a bunch of times to get past that position,
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean...
And I think Moscow 5, the stupid thing about them is they're probably the team behind the elite teams who have the best chance of beating the top teams, because they're not just going to play like straight up games like Mouse Sports is or Fnatic, but they're also the team who are going to be like the most inconsistent by far, and they're never going to fix that, I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah, their style is the type of style that makes you want to kill yourself when you're losing to them. They're buying ops and rushing you, and you're just like, what is going on? But they all have amazing aim. Russians have always been known for being pretty dumb, but buying ops and, typically just hitting shots that most people shouldn't hit and taking risks that you shouldn't take. But, yeah, I think teams like Fnatic, although I do think Fnatic has improved with Freeze. I don't know what you think, but I think that's a major improvement for them. Even though
I think they have, yeah. I mean, I noticed. I noticed like in earlier on in 2011, it seemed like Counter-Strike had changed to being where if you were going to be like a top tier team, you had to have like a solid AWPer who could do it dedicated, so you could use them in certain ways. Whereas I noticed that as soon as Fnatic got Freeze, even though I think their team play actually looked like it was a little more shaky, like if you just put him in certain spots, he's going to get a certain amount of kills. Like he's a bit like Delpan in that sense. I don't think he's quite as good as Delpan, but he's like Delpan in the sense that like you don't have to generate confidence for him or tell him like, oh, do this, this, and this. Like if you just put him in a good spot and you do your own shit on the side, then he's going to get a certain amount of kills and like win you some rounds, you know.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Freeze is like one of those operas where, like, kind of like you said, like Delpen, they don't work that well in, like, they don't really work that well if you're like, oh, you have to play this angle and you have to do this. If you just let them kind of do what they're used to doing, they're going to get you those kills. Like, you let Freeze play back 5 on train, he's going to op people. He's going to get you those kills. If you force him to just play, you know, alley or back bomb train, you know, then things are going to become a little bit more. I just feel like Delpan and Freeze play a lot better when you let them do kind of what they're used to.
Well, they're the kind of players I've always thought where if they didn't have as good like skill as they have, they'd actually be sort of retarded, and I don't think they could be in a top team because they essentially play the game as though it's like a single player game. Like it's all just about what they're doing at that moment. But that works if you're like a solo AWPer and you're just putting you on a certain site and saying watch this angle or watch this corner or something, you know. Because then you're just like picking, all you're thinking each round is like, okay, I died in this spot next round. What's a better spot for me to stand in now? Like, what should I buy and where should I go here? So all they're thinking about is their own kill. But that works if you are like such a like impact player that like if you have a good aim and you have like a weapon like the AWP, it can have such a huge impact on even the single round.
Yeah.
Because I think FX do that with Hasher as well.
Yeah, I feel like having a really good AWPer nowadays is like really, really useful. Like, I feel like for a period there in 09, AWPers became a little bit less useful, and then Markov kind of showed everyone why it was useful again in 2010. Like, I don't know, in 09 I never felt like anyone was really taking over huge games with the AWP and, you know, making huge plays, like, consistently like Markov did. And then once Markov made that, it seemed in 2011, a lot of people just tried to snake themselves AWPers to try and replicate what he did. And now AWPers have become really huge, as you can see, you know, Freeze getting stolen from MTW, Delpan being stolen by SK, and just all these AWPers are just being, like, fought for. And, I mean, obviously my team's not anywhere near as good as others, but even having like Sean on my team, SKers, gives us an advantage over a lot of people just because he's been opping for his entire life. So having that guy that's opping, just knowing what angles to hold and what to do in certain situations, really gives him advantage over like other oppers that maybe haven't opped their whole life or aren't nearly as good or experienced, giving you an edge in the game.
Well, opping's always obviously been a bonus if you had someone good because it adds another tactical element to your team, or even if it's not tactical, it allows you to just like get out of sticky situations in like 10 seconds flat that you couldn't get out of otherwise. But there was definitely a period, there'd been a bunch of them in European CS at least, where the Swedish teams had so many good riflers and such good team play amongst the riflers that their coordinated attacks were so good that they just decided to like go straight rifle like Fnatic in 2009, these sorts of teams. But then I think what happened was, like you were saying, when Markelov came along, because after the period where MTW went down a little bit, so Sunder wasn't suddenly just like this amazing like impact player who turned every game, then it didn't matter as much if you had a good AWPer. But then when Markelov became like the best player in the world in theory, or the most effective or whatever, then it seemed like every other team, once they'd lost to Navi enough times, were like, oh, we need an AWPer as well to like counter that, or like, because I mean it's natural, if you're getting owned by a certain AWPer over and over, you're going to be like, well fuck, we need someone who can do that to the other team, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's really annoying when one AWPer can kind of just pick apart your team on maps like Train, maps like Dust 2, you know, holding Catwalk, getting picks at middle, like those type of maps where the AWPer has a lot of long range shots and he's hitting them every time. It gets pretty frustrating when like you don't really have a real AWPer. Like some of those teams, you know, they have someone that can AWP, but he's not really, you know, a true AWPer. And I think true AWPers always have the advantage over someone that's been You know, even if the guy's aim is better than yours, like, I'm sure there's people with better aim than Markelov. Like, Force and Neo, they have better aim than him, but they're not better oppers. And I think, like, having that guy that's experienced on your team that can kind of counter that really helps a lot. And I think teams realize it, like you said, like, a lot
plus,
more.
I think that's what makes it significant about the way Markelov is used in Navi, is that even though he in terms of raw skill, he's very good, I don't think as an AWPer he's actually as good as... I think even maybe Pasha might be better than him as just in pure terms of raw AWP skill. But the difference is, Navi's whole CT setups are built around like letting Markelov be in good spots all the time, and someone's covering his back and someone's looking over here, so he only has to watch one angle. Whereas those dedicated AWPers, a lot of the time you do just like leave them in isolation, like, okay, you have to just do it all over here, dude. We're going to be like over here. You're going to have to make plays for yourself, and there's a big difference between if you can do that, because the problem is, if you're the guy who's a dedicated AWPer and you are like on your own like that, you're just put in a spot and you're not having things built up for you, then on the rounds where you're not hitting with the AWP or you're not playing that well or people keep rushing your position, you have to still keep buying the AWP every time. Whereas I think whenever I see on forums and people suggest some really ludicrous person as like the best AWPer in the world who like barely uses the AWP, I sometimes think people don't give enough credit to the fact that if you only buy it when you feel really hot with it and only use it then you're going to look amazing. But if you have to buy it even when you've missed like the last 3 shots in a row and you got owned, like there's only a few people in the world who can do that and actually make it work.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I've always thought that for like so many years where people are saying like Neo should op over Luke. Like Neo should, I mean, I don't doubt.
Yeah, that's a good example is Neo actually, because he obviously is good, but only when he uses it when he knows he's going to hit with it.
Yeah, I've seen him buy an op on terrain, go back 5, go up the ladder, miss 2 op shots, die, never buy it again. No one notices that, like, no one really pays attention to someone buying an op one time, dying, never buying it again, especially if they're not an opper. But, like, he goes up back 5 in a different match, maybe example is, like, versus that Rocket team, or something on terrain that one game, he's just quick-scoping people across the map. He's just, you know, walling people through E-box, he's hitting them, like, some of the most ridiculous op shots ever, but obviously he's going to keep opping when he's doing that, right? Like, if he's done that 2 rounds in a row, even if he dies the next one, he's going to attempt it again until it doesn't work, you know, twice, maybe. Then he'll stop. But as long as it's working, he's going to keep doing it. But like we were saying, if you start missing those shots, then there's no reason to keep buying it, especially if you're not an opper.
I also, just in terms of reading people's reactions to certain players' performances on forums, it seems like a lot of people like overrate AWPers and then never sort of give criticism to the AWPers, because I think because of the fact that it's such a like binary gun, like you either kill a person usually or you don't, like there's no like in between, like it's very rare that like leg shots aren't that common to the extent that you can't really do any damage unless you're killing the person. So it seems like if you're versus a good team and you die with the AWP, and it doesn't look as bad as if you like died by spraying a full clip and didn't kill the person, like you just missed a shot, like that happens. Whereas then when you hit shots, then people go nuts because it's like, oh my god, he killed 3 in a round. So it's like people over credit the shots that you hit, and then they're not as mad when you miss, because I've noticed there's a few AWPers who always got way too much credit. Like, I mean, a good example would be T-Hop. Like, he never really was actually good enough as an AWPer to be a dedicated AWPer, like on versus the top teams. But no one ever seemed... I've never seen posts on forums that were like, oh, he should be cut for this guy. It would always be someone else on his team who got that blame.
Yeah, he was kind of a bait opper too. He would like go on train and just hide until his teammates had all died. And then he would come up ladders and just start killing people when they didn't really care anymore. That's also kind of annoying when you play like with people that are baiting with an op. They're obviously going to get a lot of kills, but not really useful.
Zid status.
Typical. But yeah. So
okay, well in theory we have like an hour and a half before the next game, which we're going to do. Next game is going to be SK versus Isahara, so should we just like take a break now?
Yeah,
and then come back at like... I guess we'll come back like 5 minutes before the game, and then if it doesn't start on time, we'll just like pre-talk or something. So everyone come back at 2 o'clock European time.
Yep, around an hour and a half. So.
Okay, tell us when it's off, Jacobson.
you actually go to my comment.